What is going on YouTube? A fascinating graveyard. Today we are in McComb, Mississippi, and we're here to talk about the unsolved murder of Tina Andrews. Across the street in front of you is Otkin Elementary School. Back in 1969, many kids here coming to school, learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, and in between that, learning how to get along with others. Some like it, some don't. It is what it is. In the summer of 1969, there was a student at this school. Her name was Tina Marie Andrews. That summer, she was 12 years old. I bet you she couldn't wait to turn 13. When you turn 13, you finally leave elementary school. Next thing comes up, junior high. And when you're 12 and you're a girl, you probably can't wait to grow up and be around more mature, studious individuals. So this former student of this school, Tina Andrews, on April 13th, 1969, she had went to it's not a club, but a hangout for teens in McComb. At the time, it was called the Tiger Den, and it was named after the high school's mascot here in McComb, the Tigers. So they were hanging around. Maybe they were playing pinball, eating snacks, chips, whatever. She had went there to meet up with some of her friends. So after she left, I imagine Tina had a curfew. When the sun comes down, I want you back home, whatever her parents told her. But on that night, Tina did not come home as she was supposed to. I'm walking down Oak Street right now. We're about a half a mile from that elementary school, and this house right in front of you, this is the home where Tina Andrews grew up with her brothers and sisters. And on that night, August 13th, 1969, you have to imagine her parents have no idea what happened to their daughter. They don't know if she ran off with her friends, or they don't know if something awful and terrible happened to her. And you can imagine on that night, going into the morning hours of August 14th, 1969, I'm pretty sure neither her mom or dad slept a wink. It would be another 9 days until the Andrews would find out what happened to their daughter. That date would be August 23rd, 1969. A parent's worst nightmare has got to be when they hear the awful and tragic news that something terrible has happened to one of their children. And for the Andrews, that would sadly come to fruition on August 23rd, 1969, when they received a call from the McComb Police Department telling them that we think we found Tina and she's dead. On that day, skeletonized remains were found near an oil drilling site just outside of town. The first on the scene was a Mississippi State trooper. And when he got the call, he goes, and underneath a thrown out sofa was the skeletonized remains, what he was guessing of somebody that was young, possibly a kid. Now, when the other police officers and homicide detectives arrived, everybody pretty much knew that it was Tina, but they couldn't identify her because a dead body being left out in the elements in August, 95-degree humid heat, Mississippi, after 10 days, nothing's gonna be left. Now, what they seen was a skeleton wearing clothes but missing its panties. The panties were thrown over to the side somewhere. And it did not take a rocket scientist to figure out what the manner of death was. There was a small hole in the back of the skull. They were able to recover the bullet from the scene. It came from a .38 caliber revolver. Now, they sent the remains to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., just for them to check it out to see if they can find out any more clues that they weren't able to find out in a small town here, McComb, Mississippi. And the only thing they were able to find out, other than the cause of death, was that Tina suffered from a broken jaw. I presume she was hit with the butt of that revolver. Now, they were not able to tell whether she was sexually assaulted, but like I just referenced earlier, the panties were not found on the remains. They were found to the side somewhere. That leads me to believe, and I'm not trying to play armed detective, that they did what they wanted to her, made her put on her clothes, took her somewhere and shot and killed her. Now, you have the police department out here. They have a child murderer on the loose. So a few days turn into a few weeks, that turn into a few months. And they are anybody that basically got out of prison in the area here in Mississippi within the last year or two, whether they were on probation or parole, they were interviewed. When the news reports came out that the cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the back of the head and the murder weapon was a .38 caliber revolver, well, hell, you're going to have people that, oh, hey, my uncle has a .38 caliber revolver, let me call. So they're being inundated with calls and they're getting swamped. That's a lot of times why when somebody dies and is murdered, the police will not release the cause of how they died or the weapon used, because they want to prevent people from just calling saying, oh, hey, my brother, he has that same kind of knife and he's a weirdo. So they have the funeral and time goes on. The summer goes into fall, goes into winter, comes back to spring. Tina should have been in junior high by then, but she is dead. No longer on this planet, this earthly realm. About a year after the murder, a girl comes into the district attorney's office here in McComb. Her name was Billy Joe Lambert. At that time, I believe she was 14 years old. She asked to speak to somebody in charge. One of the DAs comes out and says, how can I help you? She says, I have information on the identity of the persons responsible for the murder of Tina Andrews. Okay, come into my office. Let's sit, let's talk. So this girl, Billy Joe, tells one of the DAs that on that evening, August 13th, 1969, she was with a friend and Tina, and they were at the Tiger Den. And two individuals in a car had offered them a ride home. And Billy immediately recognized them. The two of them, their names were Richard McIntosh and Ted Fleming. They were both police officers here in McComb. I believe that Richard was either a part-time cop or he just got hired or he was a reserve cop. He wasn't a full-time police officer. So the district attorney is listening and he says, okay, so those guys, they gave me, my friend, and Tina a ride. We told them where we lived, but they started going somewhere else. They started going out of the area to where this place is where like a lot of kids like go to like fool around and make out. So my other friend, whose name I could not find, she gets out on Delaware Avenue, which is literally right about a quarter of a mile over this tree line. So they let my friend out and she goes. And they take us to this, basically this middle of nowhere. And I told Tina, okay, when we get out of the car, we got to run for it because something bad is about to take place. As soon as the car door opens, Billy Joe was able to get away, but sadly, Tina wasn't. So the DA hears this, and here's the problem now. You have two cops who supposedly raped and killed a 12-year-old child, but there's absolutely no evidence. However, they were still able to convince a grand jury, I guess, that's how they did things even back then, to indict the two officers on at least bare minimum first-degree murder. Now, McIntosh and Fleming, they go on trial in 1971, separate trials. The first trial, they were found, not guilty, but it was a hung jury. They were tried again, 1972, separate trials. This time, they were acquitted. Now, the reason why they were acquitted is because you have a girl who says that it was them that picked them up, and then you have two cops. Who are you going to believe? You're going to believe a girl who their defense attorney just totally, laid down the law on her during the trial, because at that time, Billy Joe Lambert was 15 years old and she was pregnant. Okay, so let me paint a picture for you. So you're in the South, rural South, a lot of Christians, a lot of people on the jury that are pro-police, pro-cops. You have a lot of Christians. So you have this 15-year-old girl that is on the stand. We don't know who she is. We know that she has a child out of wedlock. So one of the police officer's attorneys, B.D. Staham, whatever his name is, basically says to the jury, who are you going to believe? You're going to believe this girl of ill repute with no morals, who's pregnant, running around pregnant, having children at the age of 15, who comes from a bad family, a bad background. And also Tina Andrews. He says, how could my clients have anything to do with her murder? And this guy, and that's why a lot of us hate attorneys and defense attorneys and what have you, is because they painted this girl, Tina Andrews, as some like runaway recluse who was like jumping into different people's cars. She was doing whatever the heck she wanted. They painted both of these kids as just basically white trash is what they said. And you got a jury in the South who's pretty pro-cop, pro-police, pro-law enforcement. And they're thinking to themselves, okay, now the only thing to tie them to this crime is that the murder weapon happens to be the same murder weapon that is used in the police department here in McComb, Mississippi. .38 revolver is a very, very popular weapon, though. Millions of .38 caliber revolvers floating around the country. So you really can't say that all because the weapon that was used is the same weapon that is used as the standard issue revolver on the police department. That was the only thing that the prosecution had to tie them to her murder. There was absolutely no DNA evidence. There was absolutely no evidence at all that they did anything. So you have these upstanding men who are basically paid to enforce the law and to protect and to serve, and you're accusing them of murder in a time where the police back then were very, very popular, even though a lot of unpopular things were occurring here in the South at that time. You had a lot of police officers who were a close-knit society, if you will. A lot of them did belong to the KKK secret fraternal order And when you have guys like that, now I'm not saying all the cops back then were into that nonsense, but a lot of them were. So you have this kind of brotherhood of silence. That is not to say that if a cop felt that they were guilty, that they wouldn't turn on them, but you have this secret fraternal order. And even if you're a police officer and you even think remotely that they could be possibly guilty, that, okay, we're all brothers here, we're all part of the same organization. These girls are like basically runaways. They run around the streets at all times of the night and whatever. And that is the thinking, or the theory anyways, that led to these officers ultimately being acquitted. It is not really known, from what I've looked up online, what ended up happening to McIntosh and Fleming. I believe that during the trial, either they were fired or they resigned from the police department because, well, they're on trial for this girl's murder, and more than likely they might have been suspended with pay, they might have been suspended without pay. I'm not really sure, but during the trial, I believe both of them were no longer officers with the McComb Police Department. And this right here is the grave of Tina Marie Andrews. And these are her parents, Fred and Doris Andrews, buried alongside together. And can you positively imagine how they had to hear what happened to their child, and that the only way you could identify her, because her body was completely gone, was by her clothes? This is just one of those stories in a small town in the middle of nowhere, America, that just never really got a lot of media attention outside of Mississippi anyways. Because like I said, during that time in Mississippi, things were really out of whack. I mean, you had the KKK stuff, you had a bunch of race riots, mini riots all over the place. And I feel because this girl was murdered and the suspects were police, and the police were looked upon as heroes, that even though it did get a lot of attention, it just did not resonate with a lot of people in this area, because both Billy Joe and Tina were considered, you know, they were not rich, they were poorer people. That is the theory that an author that wrote a book about this story says. Do I believe it? It could make sense. I'm not sure. I don't care if a 12-year-old is rich or poor. When they're murdered, that's a news story. But then again, I wasn't alive in 1969 and I did not live out here, so I don't know. But the horror that Tina went through towards the ending moments of her life, nobody should have to go through such pain and agony. Rest in peace to the Andrews family. On this channel, I go to a lot of famous graves and not so famous graves. No matter who we were in life, not all of us were known. Some of us were wildly popular, some of us weren't, some of us were very famous. Most of us are not. Everybody has a platform on this channel. This channel is not just for the celebrities. It is a channel for the common person, both me and you. Now, even though this murder took place over 50 years ago, You never know what somebody out there watching this might know. And even though her parents are no longer here, I'm sure she has brothers and sisters out there that would like to have some kind of resolution to this case. So if anybody has any information on anybody who might possibly have committed this atrocious act, give the McComb Police Department a call. The number is 601-684-3214. 601-684-3214. My name is Lamont. This is Fascinating Graveyard. I'll see you on the next vlog. Peace out.